Hi everyone, thank you for joining the third webinar in our series, Being Black in STEM, Insights on Higher Education. This afternoon, we're going to be joined by Naomi and Kitan, who are both undergraduates in the Department of Chemical Engineering at Imperial College London. They'll be sharing their insight into the interview process when applying for university and sharing some tips for success. At the end of the session, there'll be time for questions. So if there's something you'd like to ask, just pop it in the chat box and we'll come back to it at the end. And with that, I will hand over to Naomi and Kitan.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you for attending our webinar. My name's Naomi. I'm a fourth year chemical engineering student, and we're also joined by Kitan, and she's a third year chemical engineering student. So the whole structure of this webinar today is really going to be split into 4 sections. The first section will be the application timeline. The second section will be the interview day and like how that really works. And the third section will be interview tips, how to do well, how to be successful in your interview. And finally, success on a whole at Imperial and at university. So let's get straight to it. So getting to the interview, this consists of most typical UCAS applications where you would send off your personal statement and your grades. As you can see on the screen, so the grades are between 2 to 3 A stars, and that depends on, number one, the number of A levels you're taking, and also it could also depend on the type of A levels that you're taking. The timeline for the actual interview process and personal statements and everything. So the personal statement should be sent off around October. I believe that the deadline was about October 13th, but that could vary depending on the degree you're applying to. The interviews would be between November to December. Some may run even into January. And then finally, you'll receive results of the interview approximately 2 weeks after you've had the interview. Now, as you can see on the screen, it is quite competitive. The ratio of applicants to interviews are 5 to 1, and in some years it can be as high as 10 to 1. So that was the year that I applied to Imperial, but the 2019 year, the ratio of applicants to interviews was approximately 5 to 1. So we'll move on to the structure of the interview day rather. So that's really about you getting to know Imperial as much as it is about the interviewer and Imperial kind of getting to know you and how you think and like your thought processes. So for a lot of people coming to Imperial, they may not have necessarily attended the open days before, they may not have been around the university or seen it. So we do start with a tour of the chemical engineering department and the facilities inside. So one of our key facilities is the pilot plant, and that's a carbon capture pilot plant. And it's relatively small scale, but it does span 5 floors within the chemical engineering department. And it's really interactive. It's a good way for you to get hands-on experience in a plant and, kind of get used to all of the different nuts and bolts inside a chemical plant. In addition to that, there's also a tour of, like lecture rooms, teaching facilities, teaching halls, and laboratories as well. We also have a tour of the actual whole campus. So it's not just a tour of the chemical engineering department. And with that, there's different facilities such as the gyms. We also have the library that you can take a look at, which is on campus. And there is an accommodation tour as well. So the accommodation tour, it's not directly on campus, but it's very, very close to campus, in very close proximity around campus. So with that, we have East Side, South Side. We also have Byte Hall, which is very, very close to campus. Byte Hall in question is directly opposite the chemical engineering department. So it's really good as an accommodation if you're trying to get to lectures quickly, wake up late, you don't really have too much time to get ready in the morning, that kind of thing. In addition to that, within Byte, there's the student union. So, there's different union activities. There's also a bar and a restaurant, and that's all within the Byte complex. In terms of eating facilities, there's the senior common room, junior common room, and also within the library, there's also a cafe there, which you can grab food at. Finally, we have the course descriptions. So that would be an opportunity for you to kind of hear from the head of the Department of Chemical Engineering, Andreas, and he will give you, like a talk about what to expect during your course, kind of the course structure and like logistically what to expect during your course, and the specifics of that. Now, with all that being said, Obviously, due to COVID, we're not really sure about, how the tours are going to pan out. So you may end up having virtual tours instead of physical ones. So, so the previous slide was all about, you getting to know Imperial, the facilities and what it has to offer. So this is more about the interviewing question, rather, is more about the interviewer getting to know you and getting to know, how you think, your thought processes, etc. So the interview will be between 15 to 20 minutes long, and it's likely to be conducted by your personal tutor. The interview in question is likely to be your personal tutor. So it's a really good opportunity for you to get to know them as much as it is for them to get to know you as well. So it's really good to interact. So the interview is approximately 15 to 20 minutes, like I said before, and it's split into 3 main sections. So the first section is personal and motivation-based questions. These, for example, are, why Imperial? Why do you want to apply here? What are your strengths and weaknesses, etc. The second category of questions will be quantitative questions. So these are really going to draw on what you've learned from your A levels. So they'll be typically maths-based and chemistry-based questions. But it's not very crucial if you haven't covered the content in class yet, because obviously you will end up doing it during your A levels. So definitely just try your best in terms of that. Finally, there's an abstract question, and that's really just testing your thought processes and your approach, how you try to solve problems. It's not really, they're not really trying to find, like a definitive answer. With all that being said, again, this differs between interviewers. Each personal tutor or each interviewer that you have is going to have a slightly different order of questions maybe, or they may, not have that many abstract questions. They may just have one abstract question and many more quantitative questions. So it does very much vary. With that, I'm going to pass over to Gitan, and she's going to give you some interview tips.
Thank you, Naomi. So as Naomi said, I'm going to give you some tips, which hopefully if you follow, you will be successful in not only your Imperial interview, but any other interviews, for example, job interviews that you may have, in the coming years. So my first tip, and I literally cannot stress this enough, is to research your interviewer. Usually Imperial matches you up with an interviewer who has similar interests to the ones that you may have expressed in your UCAS or your personal statement. So they give you who's going to be interviewing you ahead of time. So I would suggest that, for example, you do a quick Google search, look through their research, what areas do they specialize in. And I think with every interview that you have, you want to come across as personable. You don't want to be a robot. You get what I'm saying? Like, it's fine enough being able to answer the questions. By the end of the day, you want to try and strike a kind of personal connection with your interviewer, especially since, as Naomi said, your interviewer is going to be your personal tutor if you're successful. And that's the personal tutor that you're going to have across your 4 years in chemical engineering at Imperial. So my second tip is to research yourself as well. So literally print out your personal statement, highlight, all the key expressions that you've had, all the important statements that you made in your personal statement, things that you may have expressed, for example, which areas of biology or chemistry or any of your A-level subjects that you really enjoyed. And you know that for sure you're going to be asked certain questions like why Imperial, why chemical engineering. You're going to be asked about some of your experiences. So when you do your research on yourself and on your personal statements, you're able to give logical answers to some of these, questions. And I think one of the worst things that you can do in an interview is being asked about something that you may have expressed in your personal statement or your CV, and you're not able to back it up. So you need to really go through your experiences and make sure that you can have logical, coherent conversations about every single thing that you have mentioned. So my third tip is do not stress at all. Go to bed early, get there on time or, reasonably early. You want to get there feeling cool, calm, and collected. And something that definitely helps me not stress is to be prepared. So like I said, cover all your bases, research your interviewer, research yourself, and know that you've done like the best that you possibly can. And any other thing that happens is beyond your control. So just try and cover your bases and, don't stress because it's just going to put you in a bad mental space. And my final tip is about first impressions. So you want to dress professionally, but at the same time, you want to be comfortable. You don't have to show up in a three-piece suit, but at the end of the day, you want to look like you've made an effort. And apart from like your actual physical appearance, you want to take control and be very intentional about the kind of body language that you portray. So that means, having eye contact with your interviewer as you're speaking to them, giving a firm handshake when you meet them. I don't know how it's going to be if they're like Zoom interviews, but, smiling as you're talking. And it's just the saying, fake it till you make it. Like if you keep telling yourself that you're confident, at the end of the day, you're going to believe it. And even if you don't believe it, your interviewer might. So you just want to keep portraying that level of confidence to your interviewer. And again, with the like abstract type questions, you want to talk through your thought processes at all times. And even if you don't necessarily know the answer to a question, don't panic and don't stress. Again, interviewers want to see that you're teachable, that you're calm, you don't panic when you don't know the answer to a question, because trust me, in chemical engineering, you're not going to know the answer to a lot of questions. And that's just the truth. It's about how you carry on, even if you don't. So now we're going to talk through our different interview experiences. So I'm going to start. So my interview experience was fine. I arrived there on time. And another key component of the interview day is the fact that you get to meet loads of different people. So you get to meet people who form part of your year and part of your cohort, or even your tutor group on those days. So you get to strike or form really early friendships with people that you're going to eventually meet if you pass the interview. And with regards to like my actual interview, it followed the basic format that Naomi alluded to earlier. So he asked me a few motivation, competency type questions. Why Imperial? Why chemical engineering? He asked me a bit about my work experiences. I was able to, talk through those. Next, he asked me a math question, some integration question, which literally I could not solve. I couldn't do it. And he was like, fine, you don't know the answer to this question. Let's move on. And then he asked me a chemical engineering question, which was about separation. So I think it was something like, how do you separate a mixture of this and this? And that was just kind of like a brainstorming question. So me just giving ideas and giving my potential solutions. And he just talked me through that as well. It was very much a conversation. The last question he asked me was the abstract type question. So he asked me, estimate the amount of air in this room. And obviously he wasn't expecting me to say, yeah, there's like 10,000, I don't know, moles of oxygen or something in this room. It was more so just to see my thought process and see how I logically solved problems. And at the end, when he was like, do you have any questions? I had done literally a ton of research on my interviewer. So I was like, yeah, I have a couple questions about your research. So I was able to ask him about things that he had been doing. So my interviewer was into like separation processes and some stuff about carbon capture. So I was able to ask him about his research. And, I think that was a key component that made me successful in my interview, because at the end he was like, I didn't know anyone actually reads that stuff. Like I thought I just published it and it just goes to like the deep depths of the internet or whatever. So you want to research your interviewer and you want to look like you've done your research beyond the scope of what you have to do. They want to accept people who aren't just doing the bare minimum, like just knowing your chemistry or knowing your biology A-level or whatever is the bare minimum. They want to see you go above and beyond, and they want to see you exhibiting a genuine interest for the topic and for chemical engineering as a whole. So now I'm going to hand over to Naomi to talk through her interview experience.
So yeah, thanks. So my interview was very different to Ketan's. I think I had like a very, very difficult interview, to be honest. It definitely wasn't the easiest that I'd ever done. So to start off, very similarly to Ketan, I arrived on time. I wasn't really, really stressed. I arrived, I didn't feel too pressured going into the interview. We had the course description, which was referenced earlier in the presentation. We also had a tour of like the chemical engineering department, so some of the labs and also the pilot plant too. And then it came to the interview before we actually had a tour of the rest of the university. So with the interview, I remember that I went into the interview feeling like pretty calm. I wasn't too stressed out, and everything that Ketan was saying about having a firm handshake, eye contact, positive attitude So it was going well initially, and I think I had some motivation-based questions. They were asking me, why do you want to come to Imperial? What are your strengths and weaknesses? Why do you want to study in London? Those kind of questions. So I answered them reasonably well. And then it moved on to the more technical questions. So I had 2 maths-based questions. The first maths-based question was pretty simple, to do with integration. It was just, I was given like an integration equation, and then they asked me, what does the integration symbol mean? So I literally just pointed at it and I was like, oh, this symbol means integration. So it was pretty self-explanatory and pretty straightforward. And same with the second math question, I didn't find it too challenging. Then he moved on to the chemistry-based question, but it was a mixture of technical and abstract, which is why I said it depends on the interviewer. So with my chemistry-based question, it was A plus B goes to C, and it's a reversible reaction. So it was kind of abstract. You weren't given any, like molecules, you weren't given any chemical formula, no chemical groups. You didn't know what any of the reference like A, B, or C were. You just knew that it was a reversible reaction. And then I was asked a question, something along the lines of like quantifying or identifying what type of reaction it is. So I used the basic chemistry A-level knowledge that I had. And I think I answered something along the lines of, oh, this is like an equilibrium reaction, it's a reversible reaction, something like that. And, that wasn't really satisfying my interviewer. Like, he was trying to guide me away from that answer because it really wasn't what he was looking for. So I think we went back and forth for a little while. And then eventually I was just like, I hold my hands up. I don't really know. I don't know what this answer is. And then he was kind of surprised. So he was a bit like, oh, this is, like fundamental chemical engineering knowledge. You should know what this is. And that kind of threw me off quite a lot because I've never really had anybody in an interview tell me that, like, you should know this. So I kind of panicked a little bit. So like my palms started sweating and I was a little bit shaky. And my voice started to break a little bit as well, but I like kept on going through the interview. So I think after that, I just found like I kept on thinking about the question. So like it made everything seem a lot worse than it was. But after that, I tried to bring it back. So he asked me questions about my personal statement, which is exactly what Kitan referenced earlier. You really do need to make sure that even if you don't go into a lot of detail with your personal statement, you understand it and you can talk about it confidently. You can talk about it confidently, because if you can talk about it confidently, then, like it'll really help to kind of fill the gaps where you feel like you've kind of done worse in the interview. So with that, he asked me about part of my personal statement, and I brought with me a copy of a report that I did for an engineering work placement. And I handed that to him, and then he kind of looked at the quality of my work, and then we talked about it. And then I think that kind of put me at ease as well. So I think that was probably one of my saving graces when it came to my interview at Imperial. Finally, again, I think Kitan mentioned about, always having a question if they say, do you have any questions? So she did a lot of research into her actual interviewer. I didn't do that much research. I didn't do any research into my interviewer, which I believe that you really should do. But, I still managed to have a few questions going into the interview that I wanted to ask the interviewer, regardless of who the interviewer was. So they can be generic, but try and have a question available. So I think mine was something along the lines of, like, where do you see Imperial going? Where do you see your research going within the next 5 years? Just something to show that you're engaged, to show that you're focused and you're not just like passive throughout the whole interview process. So we're going to move on to maintaining confidence at university. Now with that, so far we've covered, like how to get to the interview stage, how to pass the interview. And this is now really more on how to succeed at university, not just at Imperial, but really and truly, like regardless of what degree you're doing and what university you're at as well. I believe that maintaining confidence at university is the key for you to really be successful whilst at university, and also enjoy it or get the most out of your university experience. So what is imposter syndrome and why is it relevant? Why am I talking about it? So imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern where an individual really doubts like their ability, and they just seem to think that, like their achievements are down to luck only. They're not good enough to be at the university. They have a really big fear of failure. And I know that, like, obviously nobody really likes to fail, but I think it's more like a fear of failing in front of like a lot of people, and them like acknowledging that, you know, like you're not, or them having the perception rather that you're not good enough, even though you are, and maybe even feelings that like you don't really know what you're doing during your degree. So this is really, really prominent in highly academic environments, highly reputable establishments such as Imperial, and especially within the Department of Chemical Engineering as well, which is like a pretty intense course. So how do we tackle imposter syndrome? I think the key thing to understand with imposter syndrome is, yes, Imperial is a university with high achievers, with highly academic and highly intelligent individuals. But the fact that you have managed to, you know, make it to the interview is proof that the person reading your personal statement saw potential in you to do well. And then once again, the fact that you pass your interview, that is proof that your personal tutor, the person who was interviewing you, sees potential in you again to succeed and to do well. And having the potential to do well is really, really important. And I would say that it's more important than having the knowledge already, because you're going to be constantly learning with this degree. I think that having a collaborative approach to education instead of a competitive one is really going to allow you to make the most out of your education and avoid unnecessary stress. In a course like this, there are very, very intelligent individuals, and trying to compete with them all the time, you don't tend to always get the most out of your education. You don't tend to learn the most as well. It's much better when you collaborate together and you're able to, you know, draw on each other's strengths, and you're able to learn from that as well. And as a whole, you'll be able to succeed a lot better in your degree. So make friends with your course mates, really and truly make friends with your course mates. So yeah, practically, having a collaborative approach, I'm just going to give you a few key pointers, and there are more, but these are like the main ones that I think are really, really effective. So formation of study groups, I think that it's really, really crucial to have a group of students within your degree that you're able to, you know, like talk to them, discuss problem sheets, discuss problem sets, solutions, lectures, the lot. What you come to realize with this is that the students are in the same position as you. You're all in first year. You haven't really done chemical engineering before, at least I would hope so, because you're taking the degree for the first time. So you're all coming into first year. You all have, you know, varying levels of chemical engineering experience, but not a high level, essentially. What you soon come to realize when doing these problem sets is that you know a lot more than you think you do. And also the people that you thought knew a lot, they actually know less than you think they do as well. So you're actually all at a very, very similar level. Another key step for a collaborative approach is to utilize lecturer office hours. Now, these are hours where a lecturer for a specific module is going to have maybe an hour free, an hour and a half free, where they're sat in their office, the doors typically open, and you can walk in and you can ask them any kind of question about, you know, chemical engineering as a whole. You can ask them a question about your module. It can be, you know, related to their research. It could be about anything, really and truly. But you can just go in there and talk to them. And it's a really good way for you to get more information or build up your knowledge when, for example, maybe you weren't paying attention in lectures, maybe you didn't attend lectures, maybe, you know, you had a question, but you were too afraid to ask because, you know, you were too shy, or you thought, you know, that's a stupid question. I'm not gonna like put my hand up in front of like 100 other people and like ask them a stupid question, ask the lecturer rather a stupid question and get embarrassed. Or it could be something as simple as, you know, like you didn't really understand what was going on in the lecture and you've done a bit more reading and now you find it a bit interesting, or you're a bit confused about something. So it's a really, really good way to, you know, consolidate your knowledge. Finally, I think attending department activities is really, really crucial for you to get to know people within your course. So there are activities such as cheese and wine evenings, there's a talent show going on, there's trips as well. I think there's currently a trip going on to Kew Gardens, so that's within London. And these are a good way for you to make friends with your course mates outside of an academic environment. And it kind of takes the pressure off as well. So you kind of get to know them a bit better. And it also makes like group work and lab work a lot more comfortable for you because you already kind of know them. A few more practical steps. The first one would be definitely be open to new ways of studying. So the way that you learn at GCSE is very different to the way you learn at A-level. And the way you learn at A-level is very different to the way you're going to learn at university. You can't really take the same approach the whole way through, because you'll find that you may get results, but it won't be the most effective results that you can get. So, for example, between professors, or between lecturers rather, some lecturers prefer to, have presentations, PowerPoint presentations. Other lecturers prefer to use a visualizer and, like work out examples and write stuff on the visualizer, which is recorded. And then other lecturers may prefer to write stuff on a whiteboard instead within the lecture halls. So being able to adapt to each individual lecturer's style of teaching is really going to allow you to get the most out of your lectures and study effectively, essentially. Talking to older students for advice is really, really, really important. It kind of expedites the whole learning process of trying to figure out what's the best way to learn, or how to most effectively learn for a specific kind of module, because you kind of get their advice on, okay, well, with this specific lecturer, he doesn't use PowerPoints, so you have to make sure that you just write down what he writes on the board, or you need to make sure that you write down these key points, or summarize each lecture as you go along, that kind of thing. Within the chemical engineering department, we have the Mums and Dads scheme, and that's a scheme for second, third, and fourth years to mentor first year students. So it's a really good way for you to, like get their insight and their experience without having to approach them, because they kind of make the first move. So you don't have like that kind of awkwardness if you're a bit shy as an individual. There's also Mums and Dads activities. So in the previous slide, I was talking about department activities. So this would be another department activity. You may have like a games night with mums and dads, chemical engineering students, and it's another good way for you to like get to know them in an informal environment. And you may not always just be asking them chemical engineering questions. Sometimes you may just want to know, how their day went, or something like that. Finally, and the most important, I think this is like the most important key in terms of being successful at university, is to schedule time for working and relaxing. You really, really, really do need to maintain a work-life balance. Like being at Imperial is, challenging, and then studying chemical engineering in itself is also challenging. So you really have like lots of challenges altogether. So I really do think that, scheduling time to have scheduling time to explore, other interests or things that aren't necessarily academic related are really, really important, because that way you kind of take the load off of academia and you're not always thinking about academia, and it will really make the time that you are spending trying to learn a lot more effective, because that's the time that you're focusing on it. And with that, I think I'm going to pass back over to Kitan if she has a few more points, and she'll wrap up for us.
Thanks, Naomi. So I just want to add something to your last point about, being able to strike a successful work-life balance. So with A-levels or with GCSEs, you have a syllabus where it's kind of like, okay, this is every single thing that you need to learn. But when you come to university, you see that the syllabus is a lot broader. So technically there's an infinite amount of stuff that you could be learning. Like there's so much you could potentially do. So you need to know when to, strike that balance, and when to just be like, yeah, I've done the best that I can. Any other thing that I do or any other revision I add to this is negligible. It's going to increase my grade by 1%, like 1% for 10 hours of work. You need to know when to be like, yeah, honestly, I've done the best that I can, and like, it's fine. So just to wrap up, I'm going to say that when it comes to like being collaborative and having a collaborative approach, it's sometimes harder when you're a minority within a space. So for example, when like you're a woman or you're Black, because you feel that there might not be people who you can relate to. But I want to assure you that you will find that you have a lot more in common with people in Imperial than you initially thought you would have. And especially with chemical engineering, it's definitely one of the more diverse courses offered at Imperial. Like I think it's about 50% female or something. And I think we have like one of the highest like BAME proportion. Like there's so many of us in proportion to everyone else. So be rest assured that you're not going to feel alone. And if you don't want to study chemical engineering, or you still feel like you'll be alone, there's a lot of welfare and a lot of groups that are provided to you. So for example, there's the ACS where you meet a ton of people that you can, I guess, relate to. And apart from that, there's a lot of like welfare and like mental health help that you can access if you ever feel alone or you feel like you need someone to talk to. So now I'm just gonna open the floor up to any questions. I think Sarah has been keeping track of them. So I'm just gonna end here.
Thank you so much, Ketan and Naomi. That was such a good session, and there were lots of like useful tips in there and little tidbits of advice. And yeah, hopefully people listening are jotting down notes and taking note of that. Just to say that this will be available on the YouTube channel, so if you do want to go back and watch this afterwards, or share it with any of your friends that you think might find it helpful, you'll be able to do that as well. So yeah, please do put your questions in the chat if you've got any. I'm going to start off with one. I've actually got quite a few questions after listening to that. There are so many different things that I could have picked up on. But I'll start by asking, did you do any practice rounds? Like, I know that you wouldn't have known in advance what the questions were, or I assume you wouldn't have known, but did you have someone maybe at school or like a family member or friend that kind of asked you some test questions?
Do you want to go first, Ketan, or do you want me to go first?
Yeah, I'll say something. I didn't actually speak or like do a live interview with anyone, but I definitely like wrote down questions, wrote down my answers, and talked through it with myself. I found that now when I'm like practicing for interviews, like for jobs or internships, things like that, I do record myself sometimes, not even sometimes. If you go through my video roll, literally I have like 60 videos of me just talking to myself. And when you do that, actually, you see a lot of like little things that you do that you wouldn't necessarily have picked up on. So for example, like fidgeting or saying things like, and just little things like that. You pick up on things. So I would recommend that, but no, I didn't. Naomi?
I'm similar to Ketan, to be honest. I didn't really practice in front of anybody, mainly because I don't know, I just thought it was weird. Like, they're not the interviewer, but I do highly recommend that you should like at least have an idea of what you want to say, have an idea of how you would answer specific questions. So similarly to Ketan, like, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Like, that is a really, really common interview question, kind of like, yeah, it's a very common interview question. So I think being able to have like 3 bullet points of like key points, bam, 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 like these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, and then you can like go into detail with them. But I would say that when you're answering interview questions, don't waffle and don't go on for too long. Have like a short, sharp answer and then just stop, because the more you talk, I don't want to say the less they're interested, but it's just like now they're trying to like keep track of a lot of different things that you're saying. So just like try and get the most important points or the most important parts of, your point, what you're trying to come across at, and then just stop there.
Yeah. And like the more you talk, the more likely you are to say something wrong. So anything else you're saying, you're just talking. Yeah.
That's really good advice. Thank you both. I'm interested in whether you had interviews at other universities, perhaps for people who might be applying elsewhere, whether the interview process will be similar or the same, if you have that experience that you might be able to share.
So funnily enough, I actually applied to Imperial because I didn't think they would have an interview, and then they did. So that was a bit of a shock for me. But that being said, I think I applied for chemical engineering at Leeds, and it was an interview. It was like an open day or a welcome day, but there wasn't any one-on-one interviews. So I can't particularly say, like, I can't really compare it to like Oxbridge interviews or like interviews in other departments. I don't know if Ketan has any experience.
Yeah. I applied to Manchester, Birmingham, Bath. I can't remember the last one. But Manchester has interviews, but they didn't ask me for an interview. They just gave me the offer. So I was like, I'm not complaining. But I think no, I didn't have any interviews. But I know some other departments apart from Oxbridge do. So like I said, Manchester and some other like unis. I think for the more academic subjects like chemical engineering usually do have interviews. So just like research before, when you're applying.
Yeah, that's good to know. Cool, thank you. And on that, talking about the academic subjects, you both kind of mentioned those academic questions, about maths and chemical engineering and processes. And I wondered whether either of you, well, first of all, I suppose, knew that those kinds of questions would be coming up, and either way, whether you kind of prepared for that, whether you did any reading beforehand.
So with that, before I went into the interview, when I realized that I had an interview, I actually went on Google, and then I was like on Google like crazy, trying to Google interview questions, what's going to come up, the structure of the interview, and all that kind of stuff. And Google does kind of help you. It does tell you, like they're going to ask you technical questions, abstract questions, personal motivation-based questions. With the technical questions, I think I saw an example of what somebody had in the past, and that kind of prompted me to just go over what I'd already learned. There was no point me trying to learn like the whole of my chemistry A level or the whole of my maths A level before the interview, because it was just unfeasible and I wouldn't really understand it as well. And if you ask me a question, I'd probably get it wrong. So it was better for me to understand what I'd already learned well enough so that when he asked me the questions, the technical questions, I was able to answer it to the best of my ability and also have confidence in my answers, because they're also looking to make sure that you're kind of confident in your answer. Not that like you're arrogant and you know it all, but just that you have confidence in, your solution process. Kitan, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I didn't study for it. And that was because they had just said, any question they ask you is going to be within the bounds of like a basic A-level syllabus, because think about it, they're interviewing people from all sorts of different backgrounds, right? People who did IB, people who did A-levels, people who did, I don't know, Scottish Highers or something. So they have to ask basic questions that cover all the grounds. So, I just looked through quite briefly like the syllabuses of my A-level subjects, and I was like, is there anything here that I think if they asked me something on, like I will fail drastically. I was not about to start studying. I did 4 A-levels. I was not about to start studying 4 A-level subjects, but just go through your syllabus, make sure that, there's nothing that you're dreading. Do you get what I'm saying? And after that, I don't really think you can like study for it per se, because like, I don't think you can study for it. Just cover your bases.
Yeah, just know what you know to the best of your ability. But
exactly.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah.
Great, thank you both. And I think you both touched on this in your presentations, that there were things that you didn't know in the interview, and that you could just say that you didn't know that as well, which I think is really useful to kind of keep in mind. This interview process seems about lots of different things, and you don't have to necessarily know everything. Kitan, I particularly liked what you said about researching the interviewer, and I was curious, what kind of research you did on them. Like, did you go into detail in some of their research papers? Did you look at like biographies? Like, what was the process of that like?
So, obviously in the email, they give you the name of your interviewer. So I just did, first of all, a quick Google search, and it showed me some of the research papers that he had like published and some areas that he was specializing in. And I was working on a project at A-levels during the time that was quite closely aligned. So I was like, oh, this is interesting. So I just like focused on one particular research paper that he had written, just saw some key points that he had made. And I was like, oh yeah, this is interesting. So I just wrote down, the really important things that that I wanted to know more about. So it was like genuine, do you get what I'm saying? And then like, obviously I asked him about it on the day. But I would say research your interviewer, yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean you need to like go through those research papers that are heavy. Do you get what I'm saying? You don't necessarily have to like go through hundreds and hundreds of papers. Just have a basic idea and be genuinely interested in what they're doing, because like I said, they actually align you with someone who has similar interests. So you should be interested in like learning more about what they're doing, because it kind of relates to you. And again, like I said before, this relates to literally any interview that you do. Again, I had like an interview like 2 weeks ago. They gave me an interview. I researched, and you can strike personable conversations, and people like to feel important, and that's just the truth of the matter. So when you seem genuinely interested in the work that they're doing and things that they may be doing at that point in time, it does give you like bonus points.
Excellent, thank you. And Naomi, turning to you, I thought your section on imposter syndrome was really interesting. And, and you both kind of mentioned that at times, this course can be quite intense. And, obviously, like, there's a very high quality of students at Imperial. And that Kitan, touched on the support that's available generally. But I wondered whether there was anything that you wanted to add about, where you can get support in the department if you're worried, whether that's, professional from staff, or whether there's any other resources available through the college that you could recommend.
Yeah. So within the department, if you have an issue, the whole thing I was talking about before with your interviewer becoming your personal tutor, it's really important to get to know them, because that personal tutor that you have is going to be your personal tutor for the next 4 years, like the duration of your degree, more or less, unless they go on sabbatical and then you end up with a different personal tutor. So with that being said, if you have any like personal issues or like issues that it could be any kind of issue, to be honest, your first key point of contact is going to be your personal tutor. They're going to be the first person that you kind of go to express like whatever issues you have. And then with that, the personal tutor will now refer you to whoever they think can help you best with your current situation. So, and this is like all completely confidential as well. So you will go to them, tell them whatever your issue is, and then they'll help to, like give you the best resources for whatever issue that you're having. And then if the situation needs to be taken higher up, then he may or she may or may not refer you to the head of the Department of Chemical Engineering. And once again, they'll be likely to refer you again to somebody who's going to help you more or less. They're going to be of better assistance. And once again, that will be very confidential too.
Well, thanks, Naomi. That's really useful to know. And also just to add to that as well, a lot of the departments in the Faculty of Engineering have student wellbeing advisors now too, and we have one in the department. So yeah, it's good to know that, if you are kind of worried about stuff, there are people that you can go and talk to. So moving on to a question for you both. Now that you've both been at university for a while, what are some of the things that you've really enjoyed about, the university experience as a whole, and maybe your course specifically?
Do you want to start?
You want me to go first?
Okay, I'll start. Things that I have really enjoyed in chemical engineering so far, I think first of all was how different it was to what I thought it would be. So like before I joined Imperial, I think everyone kind of has the stereotype in their head of the kind of people that will be there, how difficult everything would be. And when I got to Imperial, or being here, I realized, yeah, it's hard, but it's not like undoable. Like you will pass and you will be able to solve questions, and you're never going to be like completely helpless and completely confused, because I thought, gosh, I'm coming to Imperial Chemical Engineering, I'm not going to know anything, yeah. But at the end, obviously, I don't know everything, even up till now, definitely not, trust me. But I'm a lot more knowledgeable, and it's a lot more bearable than I thought it would be. I think that's what like really surprised me, or pleasantly surprised me the most.
With me, I think the thing I enjoyed the most about Imperial is the opportunities available. So if you know me, you know that last year I wasn't actually at Imperial. I did an exchange year. I did a year abroad, basically a year abroad student exchange. That's what I did. I did a year abroad student exchange, and I was at the University of Berkeley, the University of California, Berkeley, and that was like the best experience that I think I've ever had. And literally, if I hadn't come to Imperial, I definitely would not have been there. So literally that alone was like the best experience that I've ever had in terms of education. And the fact that I was able to, like go to Imperial for first year and second year to kind of build up the knowledge that I already had, and then like transition to a completely different new way of trying to learn and trying to study with like a different educational system in another country, and then come back to the UK. It's been like a really interesting experience, and like I really, really enjoyed it. And I think if anything, it's made me better as a student, and like better prepared when it comes to exams and like studying and learning.
Yeah, and just like adding on to the opportunities available, even apart from things like student exchange, the fact that you're at Imperial opens a whole door of opportunities with regards to things like internships. There are a lot of things that are only open. They don't say explicitly. They're not gonna be like, oh yeah, only Oxbridge and Imperial, etc. But it's very coded, and there are a lot of opportunities that just being an Imperial opens the door for. And definitely with that regard, being at Imperial, and especially a course like chemical engineering, really, opens a wealth of experience and a wealth of opportunities for you.
Great, thank you both. And then a final question from me. Ketan, you touched on this a little bit earlier when you were talking about the diversity in the department and representation. And I just wondered whether you would both be able to share your thoughts on, obviously this series is called Being Black in STEM, Insights on Higher Education. And we're running these sessions to coincide with Black History Month. I just wondered whether you could share your thoughts on how important it is for these sessions to be run, by Black students. And although they're open to everyone, they are aimed at, particularly Black students and sharing that experience. So, how important is that to you both?
I think it's like one of the most important factors in deciding whether you even want to like apply to a specific university or not. I've always kind of been in the minority in terms of like primary school, secondary school, university. So coming to Imperial wasn't like a big drastic change for me, but I know that there are certain students who, have come from predominantly Black, Asian, or like other ethnic groups that aren't like essentially primarily Caucasian. And they've kind of come into Imperial and they're kind of like, whoa, where's the proportion? And like representation matters. It's so important. I really do think that representation is really, really important because you feel like you belong there when you see other people like you and similar to you who are there. So I know that going into Imperial as a first year, seeing, there's a girl in second year, a Nigerian girl in second year. So like speaking to her, and she was kind of like, even though I did have a chemical engineering mom, having her, she was like I called her my chemical engineering auntie, because having her there, like she gave me advice, she gave me like honest, real advice. And I really felt like I could connect with her. And it kind of meant, it meant that it made the whole, like Imperial experience a lot more comfortable being a Black person at university.
Yeah, I think I came from like the opposite of you. You said you like have been in a minority kind of position also, but I went to school in Nigeria till I was like 13 or 14, and then when I moved here, my school was still pretty diverse. So like coming to Imperial, I was kind of nervous, especially because I had like this maths tutor who was like, okay, what's your first choice? And I was like, Imperial. And she was like she was like, that obviously that there's no women, first of all, that there's no Black people, like it's just going to be full of like white and like Asian guys. So I already kind of had that idea in my head. So when I was coming to Imperial, kind of like, yikes. But again, like I said before, when I came, I was very pleasantly surprised. And I think that representation definitely matters. And I think it's very important that we take control of like narratives and harmful stereotypes like that, because what's going to happen is, incredibly talented and intelligent, Black or minority students are going to hear those stereotypes. They're going to be like, nah, I'm not even going to bother applying. I'm not even going to try. Like, what's the point? I don't want to feel alone. So I think that things like this that try to change the narrative are really important. And yeah, I think the college has been doing like fantastic, especially over like the last year or so. They've been doing a lot of work with the ACS as well, doing a lot of like mentoring programs, doing a lot of like social media takeovers and things like that. So I think it definitely is incredibly important, not only to me as a person, but, to the minority community as a whole.
Excellent. Thank you both so much for kind of sharing your thoughts. So we are coming to the end of our session. So, I just wanted to say thank you again so much to Naomi and Ketan for giving your time today and your expertise and your insight. You know, I think you've really helped like demystify that interview process and what it will be like. And it's really great that you shared that experience too of actually being at university, you know, to give that well-rounded sort of, you know, insight into your experience. So, you know, thank you both very much for giving your time to this today. And thank you to everyone who has joined us as well. We do have one more session tomorrow and then a general Q&A next week. So check out the Eventbrite page for more information on that. And as I mentioned, if you want to watch this again or share it, it will be available probably in about an hour or so on our YouTube channel. So keep an eye out for that. So with that, just a thank you really again to our presenters, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for listening as well.
What she said.